So Dr. Stephanie Babs is Chief Strategic Policy Analyst to the Secretary General and Chairman of the Military Committee, and she's joining us live on Skype from NATO HQ in Brussels to discuss a recently much talked about subject of women in NATO. Dr. Babs, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Firstly, let me ask you a question from a female perspective. What made you join NATO?
A vacancy. Well, I mean, if I can quickly, I'll give you my professional background. I studied political science, international law, and Russian studies at universities both in Germany and the United States, and I specialized in international relations pretty early on in my academic career. But I was always attracted by the thought how it would be to work within a multilateral organization. And after I spent a couple of years working in academia and working in the German Armed Forces Staff College as an instructor or assistant professor for Eastern European and Russian affairs, I found that vacancy note for a post at NATO, and I applied. I went through the interviews, and here I was, and that was now some 15 years ago.
According to some recent statistics, only 17% of top jobs at NATO are actually held by women. When you joined, did you find that there were mixed reactions to you being a woman in NATO?
Not at my not at the entry level that I made it to when I joined the alliance, because at that time it was a typical, let's say, analyst type of policy, policy analyst, mid-career type of job. And in my immediate professional neighborhood, they were both men and women, so it didn't really occur to me that there was a gender issue. Also, looking back at my academic career, looking back at my first professional steps in life, I was always a bit in a minority position because the vast majority of my colleagues at conferences and seminars and meeting rooms talking about defense and security issues were men. So I have to say I was almost pleasantly surprised when I arrived at NATO, and I found that at least in the corridor that I was assigned to, in the doors and rooms next to me, there were both women and men. Once I started to move up the career path at NATO and applied for higher positions, especially on the level of a section head, a division head, and later on I applied for the post of NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General, I felt that, yes, there was certainly more room for women, and I was in a pretty lonesome position. Sometimes I sat in meetings being one out of two women in a group of altogether 25 men.
So, recently, NATO celebrated 65 years. Unfortunately, in those 65 years, there has not been one female Secretary General. So I'm just wondering, what methods have been used to integrate women into NATO? And following from that, do you believe that there is hope for a female Secretary General in the future?
Well, I think there are two issues here. The selection of a NATO Secretary General is always a political issue. It's a decision being taken by some 28 heads of states of government. And if you look at the group of heads of states of government these days, you see indeed there are women, like, for instance, Germany's Chancellor Merkel, or you see there are women on the level of defense and foreign minister. So that's pretty good. And in principle, that should allow the chiefs, the political chiefs, to also take a selection, hopefully one fine day, in support of a woman, because there are sufficiently qualified women also on that senior political level, amongst which the Secretary General of NATO is selected. But when it comes, and that's my second point, to the NATO bureaucracy, and this is what we are ultimately talking about. We are talking about an international staff, which is a bureaucracy in the first place. I think that there are, in particular in view to previous years, also a striking number of young, very, very talented professional women who come here, who seek a career opportunity, and who would be perfectly fit to move on within the bureaucratic structure, within the bureaucratic hierarchy, in order to also at one point in time lead not only small teams and report to others, but have others reported to them. In other words, to take on more managerial responsibility. The fact that this is not the case is very much due to the fact that the selection being made on the appointment of senior and senior mid-level managers in this bureaucracy is predominantly made by men. If you look at the selection, gender selection, or the gender composition rather of selection boards at NATO, they are primarily men. So they hire women, but they hire women for junior jobs, they hire women for secretarial jobs, for translation jobs, and these women are doing a terrific job. But when it comes to deciding who should become a Deputy Assistant Secretary General, or who should become a director of a given task, of a given subject, of a given structure, then the selection is very often made in support of men. And that's not a NATO typical problem. I think that's very much a problem of bureaucracies in general, but in our case, perhaps a bit more than in other cases, because defense and security has been for ages a male-dominated world.
How do you believe that men can actually help integrate women? Because it seems that men have the control of this, so there must be a way that they can actually help integrate women into the security world.
Well, you know, men at a certain level, at a certain decision-making level, once they reach that level, they're normally in their early mid-50s, so they have been through a professional path, which was also predominantly male, at least in our case, in the case of defense and security. And they have adopted their own ways of dealing with male competitors, with male collaborators, and they're very much focused on trying to look at their own stand within a group, their own power base, their own career path, their own opportunities. And I have not come across too many men in my professional experience here in NATO that actually had really a genuine interest in looking at women and trying to support them, to help them in their professional career path. But they were focused very much on their own business.
Right. Could you explain, moving on from that, how the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 has had a direct impact on women in security? Perhaps if you can tell us a little bit about the resolution, because perhaps some of our audience might not know exactly what this resolution entails.
Well, the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security was adopted some 12, 13 years ago by the Security Council of the United Nations, very much attempting to raise political awareness about the fact that millions of women and girls, especially in crisis regions, in war-torn countries, have a very, very difficult life, if they have a life at all. They have a particular need to be protected. From a security point of view, they equally have a particular need to get access to education, to actually enable and empower themselves to become equal members of the societies in countries like in Afghanistan or in African countries and elsewhere. So if you look at that long resolution, it basically boils down to three issues. It is first a commitment by the countries who have signed up to this resolution to make a practical contribution for protection, to help protect women and girls in crisis and war-torn countries. Secondly, to help empower them, try to improve their access to education, to health care, in order to help them living a better life and getting closer to the opportunities they should have, like in other countries. And it's thirdly also very much about having or enabling women to participate in decision making when it comes to issues of peace and security. Because if you look at NATO, if you look at the United Nations, if you look at national governments, you see that, as we already said, the decision about war and peace, about security and defense is a decision very much taken by men. So all that to say, in fact, I have always been a very strong advocate of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, and when this current Secretary General, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, arrived some almost 4 years ago, I pointed him to this resolution and to the fact that this House, this organization, has not even spent one single minute thinking about it. And I happily managed to raise his interest in this. And so, starting from a number of discussions, a number of efforts that we have undertaken to raise awareness about 1325 among member states, the Alliance then ultimately adopted its first action plan. And that was some 3.5 years ago. And ever since then, we have moved quite a bit on in terms of identifying areas where the Alliance can actually make a contribution in support of these three main pillars of the resolution, which is to protect, which is to empower, and which is very much to help women participating in decision making.
Why should we highlight participation in conflict by women?
Well, I mean, first of all, in the countries who are affected by war and by conflict, women carry, well, at least half of the burden, if not more of the burden. They are the ones who are normally play a key role in local communities. They are the ones who work in hospitals and in schools. They are the ones who are key forces in helping the country to re-establish an economic drive, if there is any, after a particular war or after a long-term conflict. So they play in many, many ways an instrumental role in trying to help countries, their societies, recover from conflict and war. And hence they should also have an equal political say in how a society could possibly recover, how a country should move forward, and how policies of a given government should be spelled out and developed. And if you look at, for instance, take the case of Afghanistan, when NATO, which is NATO ISAF, arrived in Afghanistan, there were hardly any women on the street being allowed to walk. Now we have more women sitting in the two houses of the Afghan parliament. We have women who are allowed to play instrumental roles in businesses. We have female governors in Afghanistan. So you see, it can be possible, even in very conservative, very religious-oriented societies, that women can be empowered to also play ultimately an equal role in political decision-making. So it is not only about having more women, let's say, on boards of international organizations or in our European governments. It is very much about empowering women in the given countries, in Africa, in Asia, in many parts of the world where women, unfortunately, have not yet come to play a full-fledged role.
You mentioned Afghanistan, so I can't help but ask, what do you think the future will hold for these women after 2014, after NATO leaves Afghanistan?
Well, I mean, that's a difficult to judge question, but let me just say that even though the security situation is far from being ideal, even though we all know that Afghanistan still has a long way to go before it can establish itself as a free and democratic society, women have made progress in the past years, very much due to the fact that the international community is engaged, not only NATO, but also other international organizations and very much NGOs. So women have made progress, and I think the critical thing now is to ensure that they will not have to go back. I'm pretty confident, especially if I look back at the presidential elections that just happened a couple of days ago in Afghanistan, that hopefully a new president will be selected. Hopefully that new president will be equally committed to protecting women and empowering women in Afghanistan. So looking at, again, the footage that I see in the pictures of all the many women that have lined up on the 5th of April in front of the polling stations, yeah, that is also a positive sign, even though we all know that in many cases, women in Afghanistan still have a heavy life, a very difficult life.
Do you believe that gender differences have generally been overlooked in places such as Afghanistan or Kosovo, any other places where NATO is?
Well, I think, to everyone, who has spent some time thinking about Afghanistan, getting to know the country, traveling Afghanistan, etc., we all have come to acknowledge that women would really, really need to be supported, would need to be helped, would need to be trained, would need to be better secured, so that they can actually fully live the potential that they bring, that they have for the future of the country. And when I look at gender issues, that's perhaps just a more general remark, I look very much at a different set of competencies. I look at a different set of skills, of characteristics that men and women bring along. So empowering women must not and should not necessarily mean that men should feel put aside or should feel overrun or should feel discriminated. Absolutely not. But I think it's about trying to put together men and women in order to get the best possible solution for a country like Afghanistan, for a country like Somalia, for a country like Bangladesh and many other places, to put this to the forefront.
How have NATO allies started to tackle the issue of gender and specifically Resolution 1325?
It wasn't a difficult issue to get consensus among the 28 member countries because there was absolutely no country, no government a couple of years ago when the entire debate started who were reluctant to provide support for a NATO role in 1325. There were obviously countries who were a bit more advanced in their own national planning and their national activities in support of 1325, and there were others who were a bit left behind, I'd say, and had to wake up a bit to the fact that it was an important resolution. Scandinavian countries like Norway, like Denmark, the Netherlands, other countries like Canada, they were very much on the forefront to push 1325 for the NATO. But as I said, there was no difficult political debate. Everybody agreed pretty quickly on the way forward and on the need for NATO to also make a contribution in this regard.
Do you believe that a successful integration of women could perhaps reduce risk to NATO?
No, I have to say I wish I could say so, but if I look at the security challenges and risks that affect NATO and will likely to continue to affect NATO in the decades and years to come, they don't really have a gender issue at the core. We are looking at hard power security issues that stem from the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction all the way to cyber attacks, to failed states, to really power issues. And I don't see that there is a particular cause in these security challenges which could be related to gender. But I see from a, let's say, problem solving, from a from an intellectual and political point of view, I see that it would make a lot of sense to have more women and men on an equal footing and an equal basis talking about how to solve these issues. Because, as I said, men and women bring different viewpoints, different skill sets, different characteristics, different competencies to the table. And this is very much true for a business company, as it's true for a school class, as it's true for anybody. The broader the competencies are, the broader the viewpoints are, the more creative you could come up with a solution. I personally have been a proponent of a quota. And I know that in my country, in Germany, this has been an extremely sensitive issue, which was debated over years, was met with a lot of political resistance. But there is now legislation in place, not only in Germany, but in many other countries, that actually sets firm quotas for women to be represented at different levels, in particular also at the decision-making level. I'm not saying it would be the golden solution if we had something like that in NATO, but I think that if we are really serious about empowering women also in our own ranks at home here, within our own governments, our international organizations and bodies, I think we at some point will have to start thinking more seriously about the introduction of a quota. That's my personal view, and I know it's not a very popular one here within NATO, but I don't believe that, with time passing by and more skillful and talented and qualified women applying for jobs, that we will reach that pari level at some point. We probably would have to wait another 50 years for that to happen. So I wanted to simply making that point to you.
And finally, what do you think the future holds for NATO? Even after Afghanistan, perhaps after Ukraine, or any other crisis that might unfold that you are working on?
Well, I mean, like other international organizations, also NATO has had a difficult time to adjust to a very fast evolving globalized security environment. We've had better and less good, let's say, efforts or days and weeks and times to respond to that. But in particular now, I have to say I'm much more hopeful for NATO's future than I've perhaps been a year ago, because I see that there is still quite a bit of political belief and resolve in our capitals that this organization really matters, that it really, really is still important for our countries in terms of providing a security umbrella, being a policy and a security insurance for our populations and for our countries. So as long as there is a political will in our capitals, in our governments, to make use of this organization and to fill it with political life, to dedicate resources, to dedicate also military resources, I'm hopeful that NATO will be able to stick around for quite some time to come.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I hope that, you found my views interesting, and
they're very interesting. I hope that at least in the next 10 years there will be possibly a female Secretary General.
Yes, very much hope so.
Thank you very much.